Hi, and welcome to Open, the show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world to you. I'm Kibben Aline, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our borough. Coming up, in about 20 to 30 years, climate change could cost adults around $500,000 in expenses. We speak with the Senior Counsel for Sustainability at Consumer Reports to learn more about their findings. Then, one physical therapist decided to create a web series called Gross Anatomy, which uses humor to educate viewers about health and the human body. We'll speak with the creator later on. After that, the executive director of the Better Business Bureau serving Metropolitan New York sits with us to share tips on how you can spot out job scams before applying. And finally, the New York manager for Electrify NY speaks with us about how they are working on electrifying New York's public and school buses. So stay tuned. All this and much more is headed your way because we're now officially open. Hello everyone, I'm Kibben Aline and today is Tuesday, May 7th. You are now watching Open, a program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to you. Don't forget to stay connected with us via social media at BronxNet TV. Climate change is causing devastating effects such as rising temperatures, sea levels, and severe storms. Organization Consumer Reports predicts climate change will also cause severe financial consequences in the future. In about 20 to 30 years, climate change could cost adults around $500,000 in expenses. Senior Counsel for Sustainability at Consumer Reports, Alexandra Grose, joins me to discuss the report. Alexandra, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good. How are
Thanks for
you?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Now, I'm really excited to talk about this because prior to learning a little bit more about this, I didn't know that there were actually financial consequences towards climate change. Before we talk about the personal finances and how it affects that, can we talk about, can you just give us a brief overview of how this issue is costly to the U.S. economy?
Absolutely. So today alone, the U.S. is spending about $150 billion per year in climate costs. On a global scale, we're looking at $38 trillion in economic damage by 2050. And this is largely due to, like you mentioned, heat waves, floods, droughts, extreme weather events. We're seeing damage to crops and agriculture, rising costs of food and healthcare. And not all populations are going to feel this equally. So there's a lot of variability, but we know it is going to cost everyone.
So I'm so glad we're getting the chance to talk about this because I think for many people, we just assumed climate change was affecting, obviously our ecosystem and the weather, but it's so much more than that. What inspired this study to explore how climate change actually affects the cost of our everyday lives?
Yeah, so those numbers I just mentioned are huge numbers. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around numbers like in the billions and trillions when you're not dealing with that in your everyday finances. So part of the impetus for this study was trying to boil it down to a really individual personal level, and try to figure out what it will cost a child born in 2024 over the course of their lifetime. I just had a baby last October, and so this is very
Congratulations.
relevant for me. Thank you so much. But this is going to show what it's going to cost us, and what it's going to cost him over the course of his lifetime as well.
Oh, wow. So I'm so glad that you shared that with us because now it really puts it into perspective, what this could cost, a child born, recently in the future. So as I mentioned, it could cost a child born in 2024 or 2023 at least around $500,000 throughout their lifetime. And this is due to cost of living increases and reduced earnings. Can you just expand a little bit more on that finding? Because I know when I initially saw it, I was really shocked to see that number.
Absolutely. So CR commissioned a global consulting firm called ICF. They do studies for businesses and governments to determine what climate change will cost a child born in 2024. And they found that if we don't act swiftly, it's going to cost that child at least $500,000 over their lifetime. and possibly as much as $1 million. Their costs are going to go up and their income's going to go down. All of our daily costs, like food and housing, transportation, and those expenses are going to go up around 9%. And their income is going to go down to around about 10%. So, with higher living costs and lower income to pay for those costs, you're going to see an individual impact for sure.
Now, one of the major costs predicted to increase is housing related, reaching $125,000 in extra costs. Why is this one of the most expensive categories?
Yeah, so, I think housing costs generally are always going to be taking the biggest chunk out of our pocketbooks. I know for me personally, my mortgage, my insurance, and maintaining a house is what costs me the most in my budget. So not only is it just generally the biggest chunk of your budget, but we're going to be looking at higher costs to maintain your home because of these extreme weather events. Insurance costs are going up. It's going to cost more to heat and cool your home through energy costs. So that all really adds up quickly.
Now, how will it impact the way we get and afford food and groceries? Which, when I did initially look in the report, it's actually so much bigger than just going to the supermarket. I think it goes a little bit further to even how uh, the food is even grown. Can you just expand on that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So, the extreme weather events I keep mentioning, they're going to affect farms and disrupt agriculture. They're going to reduce our access to food and impede the predictability that we have in getting those food to the grocery stores. This is all going to make everything less predictable and everything's going to be more expensive. I know, the cost of groceries is already really high right now. And, we're most likely looking at a further increase of those costs when we have these extreme weather events.
And can you expand a little bit more about, you said like on farms or the agriculture. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I mean the weather's changing every year. We're seeing drier weather in some areas that weren't experiencing that before, and we're seeing flooding in areas that haven't experienced that before. A lot of food that comes from California is experiencing more wildfires than ever. So all of these things add up, and really are going to affect our agriculture ecosystem, where we get a lot of our local organic sourced food from.
Now, I was surprised to see that healthcare was at the lowest at 5,000 in extra costs, but I'm curious to know what impact could this have in a country where thousands of people already struggle with healthcare costs and just receiving healthcare in general.
Yeah, so the $5,000 is almost certainly an underestimate. We tried to be very conservative with these numbers, just to make sure we're doing two scenarios. One's the lowest cost and one's the highest cost scenario. But it only includes estimates from heat related and respiratory illnesses. It's not including, increases in certain infectious diseases, injuries from extreme weather events. There's a lot that's not included in this estimate that in reality we're going to be dealing with. So, in the real world, but for Americans already struggling to afford healthcare, any incremental increase in healthcare costs is going to really be a big burden.
Right.
Um,
And I'm so glad that you said that because climate change is also expected to affect our health in general. Just like especially people in lower income communities, they deal with a little bit, um, they face more health challenges in regard to climate change. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Absolutely. I think, low income and disadvantaged communities, communities of color are always going to face the brunt of disasters like this harder than other populations. We also are going to see, geographically, depending on where you live, you're going to be dealing with, more severe instances of, you might have your insurance rates go up. You might have it taken away altogether, depending on the flooding, fires, like I mentioned before. So geographic location, as well as your income bracket, where you live. This is all going to have sort of a variation on how hard you how hard you have to deal with this and the challenges that you're going to face.
Now, I heard you mention this number before, but I definitely want to touch on it again because it is a huge number. Over time, ICF researchers suspect losses could reach $1 million, which is a lot of money. Why is this number expected to climb so high?
Yeah, so, I think that, like I mentioned, the 500,000 is a conservative estimate, but the real world costs are likely to be much, much higher. A lot of this depends on what we do. The extent of the future of climate change is going to be affected by greenhouse gas emissions, determined by society's energy choices and behavior. So, we're looking at what our business is doing, what our government's doing, um, but also what our consumers and individuals doing. So all of these choices that we're making now is going to have a really big impact on what our children have to deal with in the future.
Now, I also, as you mentioned, it is the future. I'm curious to know how is climate change currently affecting adults and their personal finances currently?
Yeah, I think, today we are already seeing costs rise. We're already seeing insurance companies withdrawing their coverage, raising premiums. We're seeing food costs go up. I think this study particularly looks on what it's going to look like in the future, but there are things we can do today to mitigate what's going to happen later on.
And can you expand on, what we can do now, just so that in the future these costs will be significantly lower?
Yeah, I think if you can take one thing away from this, it's that we need to act now to make sure that we don't end up with the worst case scenario. We can affect the we can mitigate the effects of climate change from our choices now. But we recognize it's not only up to the individual consumer. So we're pushing for businesses and governments to step up and do the right thing. We're working on things like making sure automakers reduce emissions from cars, making appliances more efficient. But for folks who want to take steps in their personal life to reduce their climate impact and save money, Consumer Reports has a lot of resources on their website at cr.org, and steps you can take in your own home to help with these challenges and reduce these costs.
All right, well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and having this conversation. It was very interesting, and I definitely learned a lot today. So, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
To learn more about this report, please go to their website at www.cr.org. Don't go away. We'll be back with more Open after this. Welcome back. Using humor to educate viewers about health and the human body, physical therapist Adrian Miranda created Gross Anatomy. The web series follows a fictional doctor played by Miranda who is tasked with teaching GED students about human anatomy. Today, Adrian Miranda joins me to discuss the series in more detail. Adrian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks. It's a pleasure.
Now, this was really interesting to see, and it's kind of exciting to talk about because you kind of use different parts of your background to create, Gross Anatomy. Can you talk about what inspired you to combine your career in physical therapy with your creative work as an actor and content creator?
Yeah, sure. And thanks a lot for letting me talk about it. So there's two parts. So one part is that the clear one was I was finishing my last semester in physical therapy school. I went to Ithaca College, and I left that classroom, and just like a eureka moment popped up, and I was like, this is information that should be told to the public, and it has to be on television, and I want to be on television. So that was like the moment, and then I was like, But for the next 4 or 5 years, I need to be like really good physical therapist. So I like dedicated like to studying as much as I could. But then when I kind of look back further, the actual, probably the little inspiration that you have as a kid, that little things inspire you don't even have a clue about until you're much older, was that when I was about 7 or 8, my mom had a hip replacement. And she was pretty young for a hip replacement. But I remember the day that my grandmother was taking care of us, my father walks in with my mom, and it was like 2 or 3 days after the surgery. This was in the early 90s. And my father, I hear him tell my grandmother, oh, we can't go back, it's too expensive. And they were referring to physical therapy. So we took turns spending the night in the room with the mom to help her go to the bathroom. And so I think that stuck with me as I was doing my clinicals, I started practicing and being like, these people have good health insurance, but their health insurance isn't covering all of their treatments. Or these people need physical therapy and rehabilitation where they have a chronic pain and the health insurance companies aren't providing it. So the idea was, I want to get to people on television, get them at home. At the time I was watching, telenovelas and the news. I know I was like 8 years old watching the news with my parents like that, watching the novelas. And then watching like 90s sitcoms like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and realizing how powerful television was. Now, when I talk about television back in the day, I mean any screen, which is now our mobile phones and your screen that you watch Netflix on. So those were the two inspirations, was like being a student, coming out and seeing the world of healthcare and how there's a lot of barriers to care. And also when I was a kid, realizing that my family also, my mom limped for 13 years.
Wow.
For 13 years. And when I graduated physical therapy school, I was like, oh, that's why she limped and had so many problems. And so those are the two different inspirations.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I agree 100% that television has the power to educate, sometimes with misinformation, just for the effect of, just being in Hollywood and entertainment. Sometimes people will say certain things for the story. And so I think it's so important that we do have, series like yours that kind of actually educate people on what's actually happening with their bodies, and not, something for comedic effect or something that we see online. Now, speaking of comedic effect though, you do use comedy to educate people. Can you tell us, why that was important for you to add within the show?
Yeah, so, if you look at the logo, even just the logo itself, right, it's yellow with a little black, stroke, exterior stroke. And I realized that people are having so much pain, right? So it can affect, you have back pain for 20 years, you have a baby, you have a job, you have parents you're taking care of. There's a lot of stress, and then get you really depressed, right? That's the reality of it. So I said, let me use humor to kind of show that there's like a light, there's hope. So that's why I chose humor. And I think, sometimes humor gets to you quicker, and it kind of lets you open up and be vulnerable, right? And so in some of the episodes, I use humor, and then I can give you like a sad moment, like a moment of like reality, right? And it just lets you, I think it opens your vulnerabilities up. You let information in a little bit better. But comedy is really important to me. I think also I just want to be different. And I knew I didn't want to, and don't get me wrong, like I love my drama movies and TV shows, and I'm a huge fan of the dramedy, and that's where my show is kind of inspired, is more dramedy. But comedy was a vehicle to get the message across.
That's cool. And I think that comedy also helps us remember more. And so if you think about like when you were in school, when we did watch tapes that were about, the human body or science, like sometimes they're a little bit harder to remember. But when you think about something that made you laugh, it's easier to remember. So I think that's
Bill Nye the
amazing.
Science Guy was a huge inspiration for me.
Exactly.
Like anything comedy is gonna kind of open you up, like your soul kind of opens up, your brain opens up, it lets things in, it becomes disarming. That's always, and even in the clinic, in my early in my career, I looked like a baby. Like when I look at pictures now, I'm like, oh my gosh, I look like I was 16, I was 20. I also started practicing pretty young, I was 22 when I got my doctorate, and I was treating patients, and so I had to be very professional. Like it was your shoulder, I didn't want to hear about your kids, didn't want to hear about your job or your bad day. It was shoulder business, and that was done. Now, the research came out showing that, hey, your shoulder problem is this whole conglomerate of things going on your whole life. It's not just the musculoskeletal thing. So I started opening up a bit more, and I had some mentors who were, they were very funny and humorous, and so I saw the patients opening up and just seeing their outcomes improve. So it's just like a holistic being that's important, in my opinion.
Now, what are some topics and themes Gross Anatomy explores? So you could like maybe bring up some memorable episodes, or just like, is it like, episode by episode, you focus on a different body part? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah. So here's the thing. It's about anatomy, but it's about human anatomy. the show itself is about failure, right? So you have this physical therapist who loses his practice. I'm not going to tell you because that's a season finale, or that's the premise. But
All right, no spoilers.
no spoilers. No spoiler for you, but because it's exciting. So loses his practice, loses his license. He goes back to school to get a degree in education. He's thinking it's like, oh, it's a piece of cake, right? I have a doctorate already. I'm good. So it turns out that his mother is the dean, and he's failing out, and his mom's about to fail him out. And so this is like his last chance. So in the classroom, it's a bunch of people who failed in some or feel like failures, right? And some people are failures because maybe they made bad choices. Some people are failures because they had no choice. It just happened to them. So I touch on topics of entrepreneurship, touch on topics about immigration. So one of my characters, parents didn't get let back into the country, has the support of 3 brothers. They own a grocery store. And so it's a lot of different topics about, what happens when you fail at something by choice or not by choice, right? And so it has to do with like relationships, right? My mom is in this show. My real mom actually, I had to force her to act.
Oh, wow,
yeah,
that's
my real mom.
cool.
So funny story, the night before, she was like, I'm not gonna do this. I walked away, I was like, sure. And I was freaking out. And I just gave her like an hour and she came back and said, hey, can we practice? And I was like, yes, of course. And so we practiced. That's actually my real mom. But it kind of shows, different relationships of, classmates being supportive and not supportive, right? So one episode, one of the characters, Dan, is getting a shoe deal with the NBA. And for some reason is this deal, they're like, you don't even have a high school diploma. You have to get something because
Right.
we're working with millions and millions of dollars. So he's really frustrated and he just seems like a jerk. But really what he's trying to do is he has this other motive that nobody knows about until he finally blurts it out, right? But then he lies about a little bit of what I lie in the next episode, right? So these are real things. And so I put in, different topics that we all deal with. It's not just about the human musculoskeletal, it's about like the mental area, mental anatomy, right? What you're dealing with through life. And that's also why I wanted to make a sitcom and not just like, hi, my name's Adrian. I'm gonna teach you about your shoulder, like a YouTube or a social media, which there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
But I knew that to get you to do something about your shoulder or your back pain, I had to relate it to your family member, your kid, your parent, a work stressor, a work thing. Maybe you're an athlete and you or not. Maybe you're a recreational, athlete and you just love pickleball, right? But not doing pickleball gets your mental state not well. So using real character situations, multiple characters, was a way to let me say, hey, there's other things going on in the world. Let me just like sprinkle this in because you might relate to this.
Now, I really want to talk about how Gross Anatomy has entered the musical world. I
Yeah.
love musicals, so I thought this was
Yeah.
really exciting. Can you talk
Okay,
a little
cool.
bit more about that journey?
Okay, so all of my performance was by accident. My performance life started by accident. So in college, I went to do martial arts capoeira. I think it was like my end of my freshman year, and I walk into the club as any college freshman does, walks in, and all of a sudden these 6 people walk in with a boombox, and they did not look like capoeiristas. And I was like, hey, I'm here for capoeira. Like, oh, that ended last year with a breakdance club. So I wasn't gonna leave and be like, oh, never mind, bye. So I just was like, I stayed, they were nice. And so lo and behold, I started breakdancing, and then I found out that boys at that time danced, and they were in the dance show. Recital's like for kids, but in the dance show in the big school dance company. And I was like, oh, that's a thing. So I auditioned, I got in, and then just had the natural talent. Listen, I played sports growing up. I was okay. I was never great, and I loved sports, but dance kind of just came, and I loved the performance aspect. I was good at it. And so I got involved in breakdance, and I started doing hip hop, and I started doing like jazz, modern contemporary. Then I took a lot of classes. So I started the opposite. Usually people start with like ballet, jazz in class, and they kind of go into breakdance and hip hop. I went the complete opposite. And I didn't take my first class until maybe like junior, senior year of college. And then, so then I graduated, played a lot of soccer, and I didn't dance for like 3 years. I wanted to get back into dancing. Accidentally, I went to an audition that was for a play. I thought it was a dance audition. It was for a play, and so I had to like memorize something. I was like, you know what, let me just try it anyway. And I got a part. And I got another part. And I couldn't sing at all. So I got into a musical, and they gave me a singing part, and I was tone deaf. But because I could dance, I was in the musical, and I guess I could act as well. And then someone came up to me like, hey, you can't sing. And I was like, it was torment. I almost quit. And I took lessons for about 2 years, and I became a singer. And so I went to musical theater. I was in Tommy, Pinball Wizard, and Bernard and West Side Story. And then I was like, oh, this is really fun. And so I wrote my own musical, live musical, the two or three shows based on Gross Anatomy. So me playing all the characters. Think of Tyler Perry, kind of Tyler Perry route. But I always wanted to be on the screen. And so when I did this web series, I got the 5th episode was a grant from New York City Artist Corps grant. And I said, I'm gonna do a musical number in this. And so it just worked out that I had like my love interest enter episode 5 and had the funding. So I was like, I'm gonna write a musical about the pelvis, and now it's all connected. That's a song. But yeah, I think again, musicals are fun.
They're
you
fun.
know?
I love musicals,
Right?
and I also just listening to your story, it's very inspiring. I know we're talking about Gross Anatomy, but just to hear that you've really pursued so many of the things that you were interested in, I think is so important, and I love that we're actually having our viewers listen to listen to that, because yeah, you could be like into science or into the human body, but you could also be into the arts, which I think is amazing.
Yeah.
Could you quickly just talk a little bit about the Gross Club? I understand it's a way that people can kind of stay in contact and learn a little bit more.
Not to disappoint you, but it's an experiment.
Oh,
You know how
okay.
there's like Swifties and Believers, so it's just like an idea of like, hey, let's try to create this like little brand of like groupies of a group. So all of you watching, like, let me know what your opinions are, because it's like Gross Anatomy, it's like Anatomists, Anatomies, Grossies, Gross Club, Gross Anatomy Club, I don't know. So whatever you all think at home, let me know, because it's just an experiment. I really wasn't really too serious about it. I was like, hey, let me just start it now. Maybe one day
Okay.
things will take off, and we'll have to give people names. So that's what Gross Club is.
Okay, well, I want to thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us and sharing, so much about you and the work that you've done with our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you would like to watch this amazing and educational web series, please go to YouTube and search Gross Anatomy. Stay tuned, we have more open for you right after this.
Thank you, BronxNet. Congratulations on 30 years. What an amazing accomplishment. On behalf of myself, Alina Dow, and I represent the Dow Twins and the Dow Twins Show, who are young producers. They started, I think, when they were 11, and now they're 14. They started making 30-second little fun facts, and now they are doing 30-minute shows. And it goes to a testament of how much you guys do in the Bronx to make young people want to continue to be involved. I wish you 30 more amazing years and beyond. Thank you for what you do.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. "55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. "34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
Welcome back. For this segment, we'll view a special interview with Brian Rauer, Executive Director of the Better Business Bureau serving New York, to discuss common scams and how to avoid them. Let's take a look. Entering the workforce is a common goal for many graduating college seniors. Unfortunately, there are scammers who take advantage of students seeking promising career opportunities. Executive Director for the Better Business Bureau serving Metropolitan New York, Brian Rauer, joins me to discuss employment scams and provides tips on how to avoid falling prey to these deceitful schemes. Brian, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, can you just talk a little bit just about employment scams in general? How prevalent are they?
I have to tell you, they're one of the most prevalent scams in the country, according to B.B.B. They're by far one of our most complained about scams. We receive thousands and thousands of reports in this particular area. It's very concerning to the point where we're trying to really get information out there and education out there about things to avoid, pitfalls to avoid, earmarks of these scams, things of that nature. So it's high on our radar screen.
Now, surprisingly, upon doing this research, I found that employment scams aren't new. What were they like before and how did they evolve?
What's interesting is I think there are a lot of the same aspects of them that have stayed over time, but something that's really interesting, and it's a good question, is that once the pandemic hit in 2020, you saw how the world changed, you saw how employment changed. You have a huge number of people who are working online, working remotely, hybrid, and that's stayed with us, I think, to the most part. You have a case where, in the olden days, people would actually interview in person. You had to go to an actual brick and mortar office. Well, for scammers, it's a lot harder to fake a legitimate brick and mortar office and do something in person. It's made scammers' jobs easier, unfortunately. Their illegal jobs easier because now you can do everything online. Now you can either have or not have an interview online, and people have come to expect it to work differently now. So instead of showing up to an office and talking to an actual person and seeing if it looks legitimate, a real scammer, a guy from his basement 2 countries away, can look completely legitimate. They can have a very impressive looking website. They can have a backdrop that you can't really tell where they are. And you can either interview someone or ask them questions and you look completely legitimate. It's made their job so much easier. So I think over the course of time, the last several years, so many people being online, so many people interviewing online and doing all their work and their home stuff online, they've come to accept the fact that you don't need to go to an office. You don't need to have something be checked for legitimacy. As long as there's a person on the other end of the internet there, seems legitimate. It's made their jobs easier. That's the problem.
And I'm really glad that you brought up that it even starts before, for the job interview process. I thought that was so interesting because I thought okay, yeah, more people are working remote, so that's an opportunity to scam others. But yeah, when you, if you don't have to go to the actual work site, that's a really easy way to scam people. So thank you so much for even pointing that out.
Sure.
Now, I want to focus on college and graduating seniors for a minute. With the rising number of recent college graduates entering the job market, what trends have you observed in employment scams targeting this demographic?
What's interesting is they're playing on the fact that most college students don't have a lot of experience in the job market, obviously. Some of them may have had internships, things like that, maybe after school jobs when they were in high school. But the fact is they're really not going to be too savvy in the job market for the most part. And they're preying on them for that reason. They're not going to expect, oh my God, it's always gone this way. I've always expected the interview process to be this way. Well, it could be brand new to them. This could be their first interview process. So they don't necessarily suspect something to be out of the norm. And the other aspect is that they're using, unfortunately, they can be using the college's name to commit their scams. Okay, unbeknownst to the college, they're sending you an email that supposedly is from the placement office. Or it's supposedly from an actual professor. They can look up the names of professors, that's easy to do, on the college, and they can offer them, if you're a current student, say a part-time job. Very flexible hours, high pay for limited work, and suddenly these seems like wonderful opportunities to these college students, and they can fall for those. So what they'll do is they'll basically legitimize it by saying this is from your own college placement office, and that works really well for them. And if they're a recent college graduate, they're going to provide them, the opportunity to get experience. That's one of the biggest issues with college graduates. Oh my God, how can I get a job asking for experience? How can I get a higher level position when I've never worked before? Well, this just solved that problem. They're offering you a very high salary because that's what entices you, requiring almost no experience, in many cases, almost no interview, either a limited interview or no interview at all. So they're taking advantage of the fact that a student who's never really been in the job market will say to themselves, my God, this is very abnormal. This is not how people would normally hire someone. Legitimate companies want to know who they're hiring. They're going to go through a specific process. They're going to want to vet you. They're going to want to generally interview. They're going to want to know who they are and not rush the process along. A scammer doesn't really care about that. As long as it looks quasi-legitimate, they're going to give you an enticing offer for limited hours, not a lot of hard work, no experience required. You're hired on the spot. And that's what they're doing.
Now, I'm curious to know, what are these scammers looking to gain from, either targeting college students or just anyone who is looking for an employment opportunity?
I think very often the big downside of these things is that they'll get you multiple ways. In many cases, they'll have something, it's a fake check scam. That's very common in this area. So what they'll do is they'll send you an immediate check from the company. It can be a very large check. You've barely been hired. You may not even have been officially hired. And they'll say, go ahead and deposit in your account. and I want you to buy various equipment that you'll need to use, or prepaid gift cards, or other things of that nature. Send us back the ones that we need, and then the rest you keep, and that's for you. And then they're banking on the fact that there's a gap between when you deposit it into the bank and they discover that it's a phony check. So you spent your real dollars from your account on their stuff and prepaid cards and things like that, send it back to them, only later on to discover that the check was phony. And then you're out the money, and then you're in trouble with your own bank, obviously. So they're getting your money that way. The secondary and probably more serious aspect of it is during the process, you've probably given them your personal and financial information. You may have given them a credit card number to pay for certain things, which aren't real. You could give them your driver's license to verify who you are, because in a normal process, when you're being hired, you often are asked for this information, obviously. They want to run a credit report, so they'll ask for that information. You could give them your social security number, which is your most important identifying information. So they've got banking information, they've got social security number, and so do you think it ends there? It probably doesn't. Then you're facing identity theft after the fact. So they got you on the dollars you're out, and then later on you're facing identity theft. So that's often what they're seeking. It's that simple. The extra dollars, and then later on they're going to sell your information and use it to commit further crimes against you.
Wow, so this is really intense.
Yeah.
And I want to know, what are the platforms these scammers are using to lure unsuspecting job seekers? Because I know that we have some trusted sites that we go to look for jobs, but, are they also lurking there? Where are we interacting with these scammers?
I mean, there are a variety of places, but again, most of this is switched online, and you could have anything from they're working on Craigslist. And again, there were legitimate things there, and there were illegitimate things there. You can't always be sure. But again, they look at a lot of the job posting sites. They'll troll those sites and call people who have posted on those sites. They know that these are job seekers and people who are eager. And again, they'll look at Craigslist ads, things of that nature. They can contact you by, through spam emails, obviously. They can lead you to their phony baloney website to make them look more legitimate. So most of it is online. And again, they're working with a lot of the job boards. And it's rare now, the days of the phone call and things like that. I mean, it can still happen, but that's not the common way. It's mostly through all these sites and apps and job posting boards is where they're finding these people.
Now, what can people do to make sure that they don't fall victim to these employment scams?
When you first see a company offer you a too good to be true position, I know people have heard this before, but ask yourself, why are they offering me a very, very high salary for very, very limited work with no interview and on-the-spot hiring? That doesn't seem right, doesn't pass the smell test. Ask yourself, why would they do that? I have no experience in this area. They're offering to pay me big bucks for very limited work, envelope stuffing. Why would I be earning thousands and thousands of dollars to stuff a few envelopes? That's always a huge red flag. If they're asking you to pay for the offer of a job, you don't pay for a job. It doesn't work that way. So if they're saying you have to pay for your own training, if they send you a check and say, we want you to go ahead and purchase gift cards here and those cards there, legitimate companies don't send you a check and ask you to then send different money to third-party sources. That's the sign of a scam. And by the way, what's even worse is you could be part of a fraud. There's something called a reshipping scam that's very common in this. So what they would do is they would use usually stolen credit card numbers. They would buy high-end items, whether it's cameras, video equipment, whatever the case may be, laptops, things of that nature. They will ask you to then repackage them and send them to third parties, often out of the country. We've seen a lot of reports, I think, to Russia, places, again, outside the U.S. So not only have they committed a crime, the victim in this case is also probably an accessory to that crime. They're part of the fraud, unwittingly, but they're part of that fraud. So that's even scarier when they do that. So if you ever see a company offering you certain jobs, again, mystery shopping is a common scam. There could be some legitimate ones, but that's a very common title you see for these. Or someone doing warehouse work, in quotes. You're not actually working at a warehouse, but you're kind of reshipping things. Those are very commonly scams when you see that, so be very wary of that. Anytime they ask you to pay for anything up front, that's a scam. Legitimate companies don't ask you to pay for that. If they hire you on the spot with zero interview, zero interest in what your background is, that's a huge red flag as well. So there are just things that don't look right. The other thing is check out the name of the company. If they're using a well-known company, go to the company site on your own. Ask them, is there a real job here? Have you actually posted this position? The name of the person interviewing me, have you ever heard of this person? Is their email address a Gmail address and not an address that would go along with this company? What is their process, and is that process being followed with you? For example, a legitimate company, they're going to give you an offer letter in writing. It's going to show this is your salary, They have to tell you what your salary is going to be. They're going to tell you your start date. They're going to go through the entire process. They're going to want to interview you. If they bypass that entire procedure, then this is not the legitimate company interviewing you. Research the company. Go to B.B.B.org. Find it's free. Find out what we say about them. Are we getting a lot of scam reports? Are we getting a lot of complaints about this company? Do things not look right to us? You know, and you can also go to the FTC. They have a wealth of information in this area as well, and find out, do these things just not match up? But do the research. Just because someone comes out and offers you a big money job, don't assume that it's legitimate, and never give them your personal or banking or credit card information or social security number without being 100% sure it is a real company and a legitimate job offer.
Now, you mentioned the B.B.B. Can you just tell us what resources you offer to assist those who may have already encountered these scams?
Well, again, one of our biggest issues is education before you fall for these scams, obviously. So we're trying to get the word out. We'll issue scam alerts if we see that, if we know of a particular outfit that's causing problems. We'll try and get media stories out, the good work that you're doing right now, and let people know these are a concern. We have Scam Tracker. It's called B.B.B. Scam Tracker. Just go to B.B.B.org, put in Scam Tracker, and it's totally free service. And basically look up some of the earmarks of what happened to you and find out, to other people notice this? Has this happened to another group of people? Same issues, same names, same scam, and then report it to help others. But we're going to let you know that you have a place where you can check with your fellow community members. Did this happen to them? Are these the same earmarks of what happened with my scam? And we're also going to give you information, like we're doing now, on some of the red flags. So we're trying to educate people on what to spot is problematic behavior. And after the fact, if you've had a problem, we'll try and give you some information. You can file a complaint with us, obviously. But if it's been a crime, an actual crime there, obviously you want to report this. If you feel like your information's been compromised, go to the big three credit bureaus, Experian, TransUnion, and Equifax, and you want to let them know that you need to lock down your credit. And there's a couple different ways you can do that. There is a fraud alert, which is fine, but the much stronger protection is called a credit freeze. If you think your information has been compromised, you identity theft, you've given the scammer your bank account information, lock down your credit so they can't use it to open up new accounts in your name, things of that nature. And it's not that scary. You can unfreeze it if you're going to buy a car, something to rent an apartment, right. Unfreeze it and refreeze it. But the fact is, lock down your credit, contact all three, and then I would report it to the FTC. They have a lot of information there. File a formal report with them, let them know what happened, and they can give you further guidance. And any account that's been impacted by that, call their fraud department. Let them know my account's been compromised, my debit card's been compromised, my credit card. Lock it down. If it's a bank account, close the account. If you have any outstanding checks, tell them so you're not bouncing any checks. Lock the account down, reopen a new account, get a new PIN number, get a new password. But time is of the essence. If you wait a week, it could be like waiting a year, right? Because that's when they pounce.
Right, and I want to thank you so much for actually explaining this information and taking the time to, share this with our viewers. So thank you so much.
Very welcome. Thank you.
If you would like to learn more about the various scams that are out there and the steps you can take to help protect yourself, please go to the Better Business Bureau website at www.bbb.org. We'd like to give Brian a very special thank you for educating our community. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, it's your girl Kat from the Kitty Rose Lifestyle, also from The Next Chapter, where we discuss shades of gray every week right here at BronxNet, Saturdays at 11 p.m. Wow, 30 years. 30 years of BronxNet public access television. I'm a girl from Brooklyn and came to the Bronx 25 years ago, started my journey on BronxNet on public access television in 2016, and BronxNet is where I got my start. BronxNet, I feel like, is a home away from home. They support all of my endeavors, and I wouldn't have been able to be on any of the other channels if it wasn't for the fundamentals that I learned right here at my start here at BronxNet. So I am so appreciative. My son says I should stop telling people I'm from Brooklyn because I've been here now, Bronx strong, for 22 years. So I'm so grateful, and I wish you much success in 30 years, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30 more, because public access is necessary so that people like myself can have a voice. Yes, BronxNet, it's your girl Kat from Kitty Rose. Check me out every Saturday at 11 p.m. right here, Channel 68, The Next Chapter, where we discuss shades of gray. Mwah.
Welcome back. Electrify NY is a coalition of organizations advocating for social and environmental justice, clean public transportation, and better jobs. Their goal is to create a clean and equitable future across the state of New York. Mo-Yain Tham, the policy manager for Electrify NY, joins me to discuss their efforts. I want to thank you so much for joining me.
No, thank you for having me.
Now, what sparked the creation of Electrify NY?
Right, that's a great question. So first I can share what Electrify New York is in addition to what you just shared. So we are a coalition of transportation advocates, social justice groups, and environmental justice groups. And the role that Jobs to America plays, which is the organization I'm part of, is to make sure that there's a bridge between these environmental justice causes and workers. And what Jobs to America does actually is focus on public policy to make sure public spending creates good family-sustaining jobs. And for us, that means a union job. So Jobs to America actually partners with unions like United Auto Workers, IUE, CWA, Communication Workers of America. So that's why Electrify New York has a strong coalition. And what sparked us was recognizing that the transportation sector is the second largest cause of pollution here in this state. And so why not address the cause at its root, right, by electrifying the transportation sector? So that's been electric school buses, public transit buses, and city fleets.
Now, as you mentioned, your organization focuses on several areas of community improvement. One is public transportation and making it cleaner because of how it's affecting our planet. But there's also environmental justice and so many other areas of improvement. How does your coalition approach some of these areas of focus, because there are so many?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And the way we do it is through policy implementation. And so we work to make sure there's legislation and regulation put in place to address these concerns. And but most importantly, our coalition members represent or work with community groups like Uprose, El Puente, The Point, which is here in the Bronx, and then with unions, which is the role that Jobs to America has been playing.
Now, one of Electrify New York's latest effort is the Green Transit and Green Jobs Bill, aimed toward economic uncertainty and the climate crisis. Now, I want a little bit more clarification because there's two parts of it. Is it one bill or is it two bills? And can you just give us an overview of that?
Right, so that's a good question, and it is one bill.
Okay.
So the idea is the Green Transit part of the bill would have transit agencies start transitioning to zero-emission buses in 2029. And that just means as their buses end their useful life cycle, which is usually 12 years, they just start buying zero-emission buses. And then they are fully electric by 2040. So that's Green Transit. And the Green Jobs part of the bill, which is the part I'm excited about, has Jobs to America's signature policy known as the U.S. Jobs Plan. And the idea behind that is when transit agencies start purchasing these buses, manufacturers score higher for good wages, benefits, training, and it allows companies that are usually unionized, those are the companies that usually have good wages, benefits, and training, right, are able to stay competitive.
So we're going to actually delve a little bit further into both parts of this. You kind of gave us a little bit of an overview of the Green Transit, which highlights that transportation contributes to 28% of emissions in New York.
Right.
How can this bill effectively and efficiently lower this number?
Right. So that's something we found out was that within that statistic, that trucks and buses contribute to 14.9% of the particulate matter. That's the small, very health-harming small particles in air pollution that has led to asthma, bronchitis, and heart disease. So we recognize, well, you can't solve one problem by having fewer people using their cars by riding more buses, and then those more buses are also polluting, right? So it's just common sense then to also have those buses be zero emission, and so it's an all-around win.
And it's so interesting even thinking about this now because there's so many moving parts to this that it almost, I don't want to say it feels impossible. It's not impossible. It's very possible. But there's just so much that goes into it. Because as you mentioned, you think, okay, well, if we have more people just taking public transit, maybe that'll get people out of their cars.
Right.
But then if the buses are contributing as well, that also makes an issue as well. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out because for somebody like me, I thought like, oh yeah, we could all just start taking the bus or the train. But they're also contributing to that. So thank you for pointing that out. Now, I really want to talk about how the bill addresses economic uncertainty. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Exactly. So as folks may know, New York State used to have a very robust manufacturing sector. And Rochester, Buffalo, they were part of the industrial belt. And that was a pathway to a good middle class job. But since the 1970s, that's actually been in decline throughout the state. And so that contributes to economic uncertainty, right? If you don't have a good, steady job. And I can share an example of that. So there's a worker, Dion Knight. He works up in Jamestown, New York at a zero-emission bus manufacturer. And he recently co-authored an op-ed about the green transit jobs. And he shared that he was born and raised in Jamestown, New York. Aside from a short stint away in the Navy, he came back to start a family. And the job he had, he lost it because it went overseas, right? That's economic uncertainty right there. And so what we're working to do with this bill is to make sure when a zero-emission bus manufacturer like New Flyer goes to Jamestown, New York, where he ended up getting a job there, he's been there for 6 years, and they recently unionized with IUECWA, so good family sustaining union job, right? We want to make sure that job is still there 10 years from now, 30 years from now, right? And he has 3 sons, and wouldn't it be fantastic if when they're old enough, they can also continue to work there. So that's the goal behind the Green Transit Green Jobs, is to create certainty that these jobs will be around, longer than just a year or 2.
Now, upon my research, I found something called the Workforce Development Report. Can you explain what that is and how does it protect workers in this field?
Yeah, so I've been talking about manufacturing jobs, but another part of this transition is a fear of job loss. So zero-emission buses actually don't require as much maintenance and repair work. And so within the transit agencies, there are good union jobs there too. These are represented by TWU, ATU. And so their worry is that they'll lose jobs when they transition to zero-emission buses. And so the Workforce Development Report will make sure the transit agencies are planning ahead. So they can work with the workers to find out whether there's going to be jobs created, lost, and then the retraining, that's critical, and skills that they need in order to work on zero-emission buses. So they're part of a fair transition to this new technology.
And I love that you're saying this because it also shows how you're thinking. The coalition is thinking long-term.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Like every, I guess in some other situations, they could be considered blind spots. Like people may not notice, like, oh yeah, if we change it, people may be out of a job. So I love to hear that there's always a solution to, so many of our problems.
Right.
Now, there is also an emphasis on green job creation because it's not, of course, we want to keep in mind that we're trying to be a little bit more environmentally friendly. So can you explain what a green job is and, what are the benefits that it could have towards the planet, but as well as employers and employees?
Exactly. So what I was talking about earlier is building zero-emission buses, right? That's a good green job right there. If what we were talking about, employers and employees, how can we make sure they both benefit in this? We want a virtuous cycle. So when workers have good wages, benefits, and training, it helps reduce turnover, right? Reduction of turnover means that these are experienced workers that will be creating a quality product. A quality product means that you'll have customers that are happy, the transit agencies. They'll continue buying those buses from that manufacturer. So we want a virtuous cycle there. So while we're creating a green job, we want to make sure those are good jobs.
Right, and have you found, and if you're not sure, it's okay, but have you found that employers are a little bit more reluctant to be more green because they think it could be more costly or anything like that? Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, so and that's a real concern, right? What's incentivized us to do this if we're not going to be able to win a bid because, our bus is more expensive? And zero-emission buses are a little bit more expensive than diesel buses. But we have to explain that in the long run, like you said, planning ahead, zero-emission buses actually I said earlier, they don't require as much maintenance and repair. but they also are more cost effective. You know, you don't spend as much on fuels. It's just charging it up. So that's one idea of how, you know, to make sure it's a sustainable job.
Now, Electrify New York plans to launch the Warehouse Watch List, a mission focused on clean deliveries. Can you tell me a little bit more about that effort?
Okay, yeah, so that's actually another piece of legislation Electrify New York is working on. It's called the Clean Deliveries Act. As you probably know, during the pandemic, a lot of people were getting home deliveries, right? And so to meet these same-day deliveries, these mega warehouses were just popping up in communities without any oversight. And so it's actually not the warehouses that are causing pollution, it's the trucks. It's like all these trucks going to these warehouses causing pollution to the communities around it. And so we want to make sure there's some oversight around that, some regulation. And you know, there's a very direct impact on our communities, like Hunts Point here in the Bronx. They've seen increased truck traffic, and they already have 15,000 trucks going through their community a day. So you can only imagine how much worse it is now. And same with Red Hook. There's 4 mega warehouses that just popped up around Red Hook, and they're actually near a NYCHA development called Red Hook Houses. And so these are like families. These are children, older adults who are feeling all this pollution around them from the trucks. And so the warehouse watch list is a result of that. We wanted to highlight where are these warehouses being built. It's actually very hard to find out. It's not a government record, you know.
Now, I think it's so important that we're having this discussion because majority of the work requires larger corporations to take responsibility, whereas as we know from many of the climate conversations, it's always like, for a long time it was like focusing on the individual and what they can do. You know, why was it important to kind of, you know, point that out when addressing the climate crisis?
Yeah, so we recognize like a lot of these companies have good intentions, right? I mean, they're willing to invest in zero emission buses, right? And taking that risk. Or they're building mega warehouses near you because they want to make sure you get your package delivered the next day or today. But we want to make sure there's guardrails in place. And that's what the Green Transit Green Job does. That's what the Clean Delivery Act does. With the Green Transit Green Jobs, we want to make sure these are good jobs. Like they're not just going to be, making sure they're buying only buses from wherever they can. We want to make sure they're targeted. And also with the Clean Deliveries Act, we want to make sure that they're not increasing pollution in these communities, even as they're making it more convenient to get your package delivered.
Now, how can viewers ensure city leaders take action?
Right, that's a great question. So we've actually been working on the Green Transit Green Jobs bill for 3 years now. So the question is, why hasn't it passed yet? So that's why we're actually glad we're here in the Bronx, because we're calling on Speaker Heastie to get that bill through the Assembly right now. We believe it makes sense, it's common sense, and it's affecting the communities right here. And so that's the Green Transit Green Jobs bill. And with the Clean Deliveries Act, we've been working about a year and a half, and we've been asking the Senate, Assembly, Governor, get it done. And so they can actually go to our Twitter at Electrify New York to find out how they can sign letters.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us and telling us a little bit more about the work you're doing to protect our communities and our planet.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
To learn more about their efforts, please go to their website at www.electrifyny.org. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining us and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you miss any part of today's show, you can catch the recable cast at 5 and 10 p.m. on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios Channel 33, or watch anytime on the web at BronxNet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Hymie on Wednesday and with Rena Valentine on Friday. I'm Kibin Aline, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.